Welcome back and thank you for staying with us on The Conversation. Now, Donald Trump's second term could lead to a more transactional relationship between the U.S. and African nations, with an emphasis on trade, investment, and security cooperation, possibly at the expense of humanitarian concerns and broader diplomatic engagement. Now, bilateral deals could also increase, but multilateral diplomacy might take a back seat. The approach would likely continue to be pragmatic, focusing on economic self-interest with less attention to issues like climate change or even human rights, unless they align directly with the U.S. strategic goals. Now, African nations will need to navigate this evolving landscape, balancing their interests with the potential for both opportunities and challenges under a Trump administration. Now, joining me on the conversation to speak more on this, we have Ademola Oshodi, an African affairs analyst. Thank you so much, Mr. Oshodi, for joining us at this time.
Thank you.
All right, now, with Donald Trump now entering the second term, how do you expect U.S. foreign policy to shift? You know, in his first term, we saw an emphasis on America first and a move away from multilateralism. So how do you expect it to shift?
It's going to be shifted to exactly what you said. It's going to be very self-interest, America first, and it's going to be on their own strategic advantage. What benefits the United States with the leadership of Donald Trump? So it's not far from what you just said in your intro. The only difference is Africa would only mean to them on security and commodity matters. To be very frank, anything else beyond that is just just that. That's the most what they want from Africa, and they also want Africa reducing their migration to the United States and even Europe, if necessary.
All right, now still talking about under Trump's first term, when he served in his first term, but then in his second term, do you expect a deeper push for trade partnership with African countries? And how do you think that this would actually impact the African Union's vision for continental free trade?
Well, there's some countries in Africa that have a special trade arrangement with the United States. This is to encourage them because they provide a well-needed, I would say, public relations and also for humanitarian concerns for Americans concerned about helping Africa. But many of these agreements are hinged on human rights and democracy, and also how much it benefits the U.S. economy. I think you have Kenya, you have South Africa, at least one of these two countries, and maybe Ghana, that have this special arrangement. But with Trump, I believe some of these arrangements will be expiring next year, 2025, and he will probably assess and to determine how much does this in any ways infringe on the American economy. Does it benefit them? Or does it just, it's so minuscule that it makes no difference? But regarding trade, Africa has to tell the Americans that we want to have a fair arrangement. We want to ensure that what benefits you also benefit us. There are countries in Africa that America cannot ignore, especially Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, and maybe Egypt for many strategic and economic reasons. Nigeria has crude oil. South Africa has a lot of commodities. So does many parts of sort of Kenya. Egypt has strategic interests in the Middle East, and also you have other countries that provide security arrangements for the West in Africa. Rwanda provides a lot of troops and helps to stabilize Central Africa and other parts of Africa. So they will look at it in their interest, and based on that interest, they will likely provide favorable trade arrangements to ensure those countries are well rewarded for helping them contain and pursue American interests on the continent.
Okay.
Now, the most important go ahead, yeah.
All right, let's touch briefly on security. Now, we know in Africa that U.S. military engagement, has focused heavily on counterterrorism operations in the Sahel, Horn of Africa, and also the Lake Chad Basin. Do you foresee a continued military footprint in Africa under Trump's second term, and how will this shape the U.S.-Africa security landscape?
Well, security is the paramount concern for America in Africa. The African continent, unfortunately, is not a major concern to them beyond again security and maybe commodities. But in the Sahel, the West African line between the savannah and the desert, where you have countries like Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and even Chad, there's this roaming militancy with fundamentalist against Western ideals and Western interest that potentially may be very damaging to the West. They have there are rumors of Al-Qaeda-like elements hovering around these desert areas that may be a place that could to just fester and become another Afghanistan. So the Americans are very concerned about that. The Americans had troops in military bases in Niger and in Mali, so did the French and even the Germans. Now they've all been kicked out. The Americans will probably be very concerned about what's going on there. They will have intelligence, elements on the ground there and in the air, watching and intercepting communication to ensure that the growing menace there is curbed. Obviously, with that vacuum, you have the Russians there now with the Wagner Group. They're trying to provide the security that the Africans felt the West, the Americans, and the French could not. So they're going through their own challenging process with a lot of disastrous effect, and not providing that security that they yearn for. But the Americans will be very concerned about security in West Africa and in parts of even East Africa, Mozambique, where there's a lot of oil installations. But beyond that, it's just migration, stopping these people from less developed countries, or as Trump would say, shithole countries, from making their way through the Mediterranean or through the Atlantic.
Okay, we'll talk about immigration in a bit, but you talked about, oil and gas. Trump's energy policies prioritize oil and gas production, often with a focus on energy dominance. How can his administration's approach, or how will his administration's approach to energy extraction and resource management affect African countries rich in oil and gas like Nigeria and Angola?
Well, they have lost long-standing investments in those two countries, Nigeria, Angola, and they're ensuring that those investments provide the needed cheap energy for the United States and the West. Of course, the Americans have developed a shale oil extraction means whereby their production has gone up and their dependency on importation from other parts of the world, whether in the Middle East or in Nigeria or Angola, has lessened. So it's less of a vulnerability for them. But they still need the oil taps being open and being flushed to the West. They need the prices very cheap. So, when elections come up every 2 years or every 4 years, the American electorate can gauge their presidents and say, look, is my standard of living, higher or lower? So they still need the oil coming up from less developed areas. So it's more of a strategic interest for them. But beyond that, they would ensure that they throw tokens of trade arrangements whereby maybe they'll allow, cashew nuts, cocoa, yam, all the cash crops from hide, whatever, from other parts of Africa to get to the West. Obviously, Africa is not a beacon for manufactured goods. So it's the West, especially America, with the Donald Trump presidency, would ensure that continues, and they would ensure whatever jeopardizes or puts that at risk is curbed. And hence the militancy, the military rule in the Sahel. For them, they don't have much oil to give the Americans, but they were very concerned about what happens in places like Nigeria, Angola, and Gabon, where there's major oil reserves, to ensure that they get cheap gasoline for their economy. So that's a key part of America's strategic interest in Africa. Of course, they have if I can go on to much militarist and security concerns. They need Africa to be stable. They don't want that chaotic situation whereby people are migrating across the Mediterranean. They don't want a situation whereby poor, neglected people are taking solace with Islamic fundamentalists and threatening the West. They don't want a situation whereby they put on the television that they see famine and war, and and seeing basically Westerners being threatened.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a raging war going on in Sudan right now, and the West is not as concerned as they will be maybe in the Middle East or in somewhere in China or in Asia.
All right. Now, you talked about migration policies. Now, we know that Trump's policies have been widely criticized, particularly in reduction, particularly the reduction of refugee admissions. How will these policies affect African migrants? And I'm speaking to those fleeing conflict, like you talked about those in Sudan and the rest, or even economic hardship. What impacts will it have on the African diaspora in the U.S.?
Well, they must be shaking in their boots right now. They really must be shaking. The last Trump administration, we had a lot of people, that were not denied visa to enter America. A lot of people that had green card applications, people to join their spouse was quite delayed. There was also issues of stopping Muslim countries from accessing America. It is really scary for immigrants aspiring to settle in America, and I would say even the border of America, like in Mexico or even Canada, American policy would influence them, make their government more populist, and they'll be harder for people to even access those countries to make their way to America. It is bad for immigrants right now. If in America, whether you have your documentation or you're aspiring to get if you aspire to get your documentation or even aspire to enter America. So it is a major Trump electoral mandate to curb immigration to the southern border. And I'm sure just generally even people coming in from the plane, from flying into America and finding ways either for skilled staff, skilled employees or spouse or even family, we expect the process to be slowed off and very frustrated. And many even could even be outright banned. The Republicans, where Trump is representing, the Republicans will control the Senate. They will also control the lower house, the Congress, the House of Rep. And with those three areas under likely a Trump leadership, it's going to be easy for him to pass legislation and not be challenged in many areas. He has a court system that he's been, basically had a big part in having those Supreme Court members, put in place. So they, in many cases, may favor his government policy. So it's a dire situation for immigrants aspiring to go into America. All those that are trying to get their papers concluded.
All right, now just before we wrap up, in 1 minute, can you talk about something that actually concerns, especially us in Nigeria here? You know, we know many African countries face a growing debt crisis, you know, partly due to loans from China. How do you think his second term would address Africa's debt burden, particularly, you know, with regards to debt restructuring and also forgiveness programs?
Well, regarding China, the Americans do not want the Chinese to have a strong footing in Africa or any other parts of the world. So it's very important that China is seen as a counterweight to the Americans, and African leaders should take a cue in this and ensure that you know, as much as we all pray for Western money and Western education and Western expertise, the Chinese are also an alternative for facilities, for expertise, and also for, you know, in many ways a counterweight to the Americans. The Americans will try to ensure that even the Western institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, will try to ensure that African countries don't get too dependent on the Chinese. The Chinese offer very cheap loans, and they don't have to go through any special, or not necessarily any humanitarian condition like human rights or democracy, you know, to provide any assistance to Africa. For instance, the Obama administration did not sell military hardware, at least effective, lethal military hardware to Nigeria because of human rights violations they felt by the Nigerian government. While by Trump, the first Trump administration, opened those taps and allowed Nigeria to buy very needed equipment to fight Boko Haram, which we are succeeding in.
Yeah.
We bought planes, we bought a lot of heavy equipment from a Trump administration, which is quite ironic. Trump has been more favorable, I repeat, Trump has been more favorable to Nigeria than Obama.
Okay.
As much as we feel good about Obama and we love him, for Nigeria's interest, Trump has benefited us actually more. There's been more financial assistance and more military equipment. And he even met Buhari. Buhari was his first African leader that visited the White House under a Trump presidency.
Well,
so
Mr.
It's something we should note.
Yeah, Mr. Oshodi, sadly, I actually wish we could speak more on this, but time is definitely not on our side. But thank you so much. We appreciate you for taking time out to speak to us on the conversation this evening. That was Ademola Oshodi, African Affairs Analyst.